Okay, now that we're finished with the vowels, we're going to take a look at the Schrift consonants. Now, just like last time, if you like, follow along with your Schrift key. If you didn't watch the last lesson, this key is available in the additional document section of the course. The first letter we're going to look at is the letter B. A B looks very similar to the cursive B we all learned in school. And it ends with the stroke to the right here. So this stroke is very important in recognizing our B. The letter C. A C kind of looks like an I with no dot. Can you imagine a dot above it and it being an I? If there's no dot, however, it should be a C. C usually occurs in the letter combination CK, CH, and SCH. And C's are sometimes kind of hidden in the script. It's a very small letter and sometimes looks like just a little stroke that you're not really sure what it is. So if you have a stroke before a K or an H or in between an S and an H, chances are that it could be a C. The letter D. D finishes with an upward loop right here that's usually not attached to the following letter. So this little telltale loop is a sign it's a D. The circle of the D is usually open. Next letter is the letter F. It's similar to our cursive F. And an F goes below the baseline. So this straight line will be down below the line of writing. There's a loop at the top. And an F is normally crossed. If it's not crossed, if the author forgot to cross his F or dot his I or cross his T, an F can resemble an S. So an F should be crossed, but be aware that the scribes were human too, and sometimes were writing too quickly to remember to cross their Fs. So if your word doesn't make sense with the S that you think this looks like, try an F. The letter G is pretty easy to recognize. It looks like our cursive G. It also goes below the baseline with this loop. And a G can sometimes be confused with a P. We'll talk more about this when we get to the letter P, but be aware that G's and P's can sometimes look alike. Now, the letter H is my favorite letter. Why? Because it's very easy to recognize. An H will have a loop above and below the baseline. So with these two loops, you can be sure that your letter is an H, usually. There's always exceptions with the handwriting, but the loops should signify an H. The letter J resembles our cursive J, has a dot above the letter, and it goes below the baseline. Now the letter K is a bit complicated. It has a loop above the midline right here, and it sometimes has a second loop on the lower half. So K's usually look like this. They're not always very clear letters, but familiarize yourself with how this should look, and you should be able to decipher your K's. L, on the other hand, is a piece of cake. It looks just like our cursive L. However, it can sometimes be confused for a B. B's have that horizontal stroke right here, but if the scribe didn't clearly write his horizontal stroke, you may be confusing an L for a B or vice versa. So knowing that these two letters look similar can help you figure out your word. If it's not making sense with an L, try a B. If it's not making sense with a B, try an L. M. M's and N's can get confused, but the way to tell them apart is to count the points at the bottom of the letter. An M should have 4 points. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you start counting the points right where the letter before it ends. So when you have a word with many letters all together, sometimes it's hard to tell where one letter starts and one begins. But that's why I try to identify the letter before, draw a straight line down to separate it from the next letter, and then I start counting my points. 1, 2, 3, 4, we have an M. Whereas the N, on the other hand, only has 3 points at the bottom. 1, 2, 3. So if you're not sure if it's an M or an N, count your points. 4 for an M, 3 for an N. Now here's our P. You'll remember how I said that the P and the G can sometimes be confused. A P, however, has this backward loop above the baseline. It also has a loop below the baseline, similar to our G. The way that you can tell them apart is that the upper loop should be more to the right of the lower loop with a P. With a G, you'll remember, the loop is over here. A P, the loop should be more to the right. Now, Q is not very common in the German language. If you do see it, it will be combined with U. So remember, our U has that U swoop above it. And it will have a straight line below the baseline. It's not usually looped. R is a very common letter in German. It's open at the top. I think it kind of resembles an open bucket, if you can imagine right here, a bucket. And it finishes with the horizontal stroke to the right. Sometimes you may see an R with a small loop in this bottom corner right there. Now in the handwriting, this bucket is not always clear, so sometimes R's can look like E's or N's. So just keep an open mind and try our replacement trick. If it doesn't make sense with an E or an N, try replacing it with an R and see if that works. Now S is a little bit complicated because there are actually 3 different ways to write this letter. One of the ways is a capital S, which we'll talk about in the capital lesson, but these 2 ways are our lowercase s. This S is just a straight slanted line, and it's used at the beginning of lowercase words or the beginning of syllables. So for example, one lowercase word in German that starts with an S is schön, which means beautiful. Since it's a lowercase word, we'd use this S. Bleistift is the German word for pencil. Since Stift is the start of a syllable, we would use this S. So this S is used at the start of lowercase words or the beginning of syllables. As I mentioned with the F, S's and F's can sometimes be confused, especially if the F is not clearly crossed. So being aware of that is also important. Now this S, I think kind of looks like a 6. And this S is our end S, or our final S. It is used at the end of words or the end of a syllable. So for example, in the word Bus, which means bus, we would use this S because it's the end of the word. So this S up here, the beginning of lowercase words or the beginning of syllables. This S down here, the end of words or the end of a syllable. Letter T is a lot easier than the S. It just looks like our cursive T. Should be crossed in the middle, just like our T. Moving on to the letter V, it's kind of similar to an R, but it finishes with this pouch at the end. This pouch is the telltale sign of a V. It can be confused with a W, but the V is a little bit more narrow than the W, and I'll talk about the differences more once we get to the W. And here we are. Now the W has this extra up and down stroke compared to the V. You'll notice our V has one up and down stroke and then the pouch, whereas the W has 2 up and down strokes and then the pouch, and therefore is wider than the V. Now the letter X is not very common in the German language. You may see it in a name like Max or other certain things, but it's not a letter you'll see a lot. It has a loop above the baseline, and it also goes below the baseline with this forward looping tail. So this isn't something you'll see very often. So if it's a lowercase letter and you see it, you can entertain the possibility that it may be an X. The letter Y, we're getting to the end. Similar to a V or an R with a tail. It goes below the baseline and it's pretty easy to recognize. Like if you can kind of imagine our cursive Y looking like that. Now Y's can be umlauted. Remember the umlauts are those two dots above the letter. In German today, they would not umlaut the Y, but in a lot of older genealogy documents, you will see a two dots above the Y. So if you see two dots with a letter going below the line, it might be a Y. And our final letter, the Z, looks just like our cursive Z, goes below the baseline, and every once in a while you might get confused with a G or a P just because of this loop here. But the Z has this little part here and no loop at the top, so I usually don't have too many difficulties deciphering Z's, and hopefully you won't either. And then one extra letter in the German alphabet, the S set. Now the S set looks like this. Some people say it looks similar to a B, if these is especially rounded up here. It goes below the baseline. And the way we pronounce it is a double S. So S set is just pronounced S. So some words you may see this character, and other versions of the same word you may see written with the two S's. So don't get too scared if you see it. All it means is SS. All right, congratulations. We've gotten through all the consonants in the alphabet. Now let's take a look at some real life examples from actual letters and documents that I've worked with. Now here we see a loop above and below the line. Get your key out, take a look at all the letters in the alphabet on your key, and remember what we just learned. With the loop above and below the line, what could that be? An H, congratulations. Now here, we have our bucket letter. Do you remember which letter looks like a bucket? If you guessed R, you're right, doing good so far. And this word altogether is the word Jahr, which means year. You'll see this word in a lot of genealogy documents. To continue on, this letter is a straight line down with a cross. Any guesses what that could be? An F, good job. And this word is the word Beruf, which means occupation. Now here we have two letters. They're both crossed, and they just look like our cursive version of the letter, T. Here we have another letter that resembles our own cursive version, just a loop. That one is an L. And then finally we have a similar loop but with a clear horizontal line to the right. Do you remember which letter I said looks like an L but has that horizontal line? If you guessed B, you're correct. This is a name, Gottlob. Okay, a couple more. This is an end letter. It kind of looks like a 6. Do you remember what that letter can be? That's our end S, and this name is Andreas. Now here, we have a sprawled letter. This might be a little harder, but let's count our points. This is where the letter before it ends, so we have 1, 2, 3. 3 points. What could that letter be? If you guessed N, you're correct. And here we see our dot and our I below. This word is ein, which means a or one. So we have our narrow E, our I, our dot, and N, ein. And up here we have A, N, D with that loop. You see that loop isn't connected to the following letter. R, we have a very narrow bucket there. E, A, S. And then down here, we have that final loop. That is a D, and this word is und or and. We have our U swoop, N, D, und. And there's our U swoop. Moving on. Here we have a very small pouch, but the fact remains it still is a pouch. And that is a V, our up and down stroke with our pouch. There we have our bucket letter. What's the bucket letter? R, very good. And here we have a letter that resembles our cursive letter. It goes like this with a loop below the line. And that is our Z. And then finally, we have another letter that somewhat resembles our cursive. A little bit of a loop here and a loop below the line. That is a G. This word is 40, which is the number 40. We have V, I, E, R, Z, I, with our dot, and G. Now this letter is just a straight slanted line. It's a lowercase word. So that is our lowercase s at the beginning of a word. And here we have two dots. So which letter did I say could have two dots above it? Our Y. Here's our Y with the umlaut. So this likely comes from an older document with an umlauted Y. And this word is sein, which is the German word for to be. And today it's spelled S-E-I-N, but you may see S-E-Y-N on older documents. So we have S-E-Y-N, sein. A couple more. Here we have a letter that we don't have in the English alphabet, and that is our S set. So this word is 30, which means 30. And this one I'm giving to you as a freebie. This is our N, Monate. We have 1, 2, 3 points, and it starts right where our O ends, that first point. So here we have D, our bucket R, our narrow E, I, S set, I, G. And over here we have Monate, which means months, M, O with that horizontal line, the strokes of our N. So basically with an O, because it starts with a horizontal line, we have to count that first point there. So we have 1, 2, 3. A, T, and then our narrow E. And let me go back to the first word slide and show you the different words. So here we have Beruf, B, E, R, U with our swoop, F. And then Gottlob, G, a very open O. And you'll see here, there's not that horizontal line there. So remember how I told you A's and O's can get confused? This is a case where it could clearly look like an A as it finishes with a downward stroke to the right. But based on the context of the other letters, we know it should be an O. T, T, L, O. This is a much nicer O. B. Okay, so there you have it. Those are our consonants. During the next couple sections, go through, look at the flashcards, do the practice activities, and you should get much more confident in recognizing the Krenschrift consonants.